The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good afternoon. Hi, good afternoon. Today's Thursday, December the 10th. It is 2 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time, and I wanted to welcome you to this special second of two webinars featuring Lords Ashley Hunter and Dane Figueroa Edidi. This webinar is co-hosted by the National Empowerment Center, the Casa Ruby Multicultural Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Center, and the Trans Women of Color Collective, otherwise known as TWOC. My name is Jennifer Pedron. I'm one of your co-facilitators for today with Oryx Cohen, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the National Empowerment Center. I'm a person with shared lived experience, and this opportunity to facilitate this particular webinar is special to me. And so I am happy to be here with you. I'm a national activist advocate on behalf of mental diversity. I'm a psychiatric survivor, and I am principal of Klein, Padron and Associates based out of Maryland. And with that, I will close out here and let Oryx introduce yourself. Oryx Cohen, please.
Hi, everybody. We're trying something new with this webinar using the webcams. It's going to be more of a personal webinar. If you want to get access to a PowerPoint, you can check out the last webinar that we did in this series, which is now posted on our website, www.power2u.org, on the resources section right at the top. There's an excellent resource from the last webinar you can check out. So yeah, we're going to be more dialogical in this webinar using the webcams, and want to point you to your dialog box. You have a question function. Want to encourage you to use that throughout the webinar. Ask questions, make comments, give out your gratitude and your compliments if you want to do that. That's always appreciated. And there's also a chat function, so please make sure to use those. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available again on our website after the webinar is over. So thank you for joining us today. We at the National Empowerment Center, and again, my name is Oryx Cohen. We are thrilled to be hosting these webinars and being able to have these conversations and strategize about what we can do to make people's lives better. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jen.
Yeah, thanks, Oryx. These dialogues are very important. I want to tell you about Lords Ashley Hunter and her background. She is a healer, orator, academic, and she served as a transformative thought leader and change agent for grassroots initiatives impacting the socioeconomic growth and leadership development of communities disproportionately impacted by state-sanctioned violence for the past 20 years. Lords does not use pronouns, but you can refer to Lords by using goddess, queen sister. She's a researcher, curriculum development, global organizer, and activist, centers healing, restoration, fellowship, and action as catalyst of social justice change agent. Lords earned her bachelor's degree in social theory, structure, and change with concentrations in race, class, and gender studies from SUNY, Empire State College, and an executive master of public administration from Rutgers University School of Public Affairs and Administration. She's originally from Detroit, Michigan, and is currently based in Washington, D.C., in the capital of the U.S. She's a co-founder and national director of the Trans Women of Color Collective, otherwise known as TWOC, TWOCC, and she's the Chief Operations Officer of Casa Ruby Multicultural Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Center in D.C. Dane Figueroa Edidi, dubbed Lady Dane, the ancient jazz priestess of Mother Africa, is an African-Cuban and indigenous American performance artist, healer, and native of Baltimore, Maryland, based in Washington, D.C. She's the author of Yamaya's Daughters Brew in Baltimore, Love Letter, blogger for the Queen Goddesses, co-host of the Inside Out radio show, and she's a member of the Trans Women of Color Collective leadership team, a volunteer at Casa Ruby LGBT Center, and a life coach. Since the age of 21, Dane has been facilitating healing and restorative workshops, classes, and practices. She's a founding member of the interdisciplinary theater company called Force Collision and a Trans 100 2015 honoree. She began producing her own cabarets at the age of 17. She utilizes art as a tool for advocacy and healing. An advocate for trans voices in art, in 2013 she became the first trans woman of color publishing authors of work of fiction in DC with her novel, Yamaya's Daughters. Making history again in 2015 when she became the first trans woman of color playwright to be chosen for Theater Alliance's new play development series, and she thus became the first TWOC playwright to have her play featured at the Kennedy Center's Page 2 Stage Festival, showcasing her work with art as a tool for healing and community engagement, and her knowledge around historic spiritual communities in relation to gender and sexuality. And with that, I'd like to present to you Lourdes and Dane.
Oh, there's something going on with your volume, I think. We had just tested this.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, all set.
You're here now. Awesome. Hi, everybody. Hello. Hi. Yeah. Dang. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Lourdes Ashley Hunter, and I'm here with my sister, colleague, and friend, Dane Aditi Figueroa. And we're really excited to be here to have an opportunity to talk about how we're using healing work, to talk about art, to just talk about history and context, and just to celebrate all of this wonderful Black, trans, indigenous bounty that is sitting before you today. So yes, Dane, how are you doing today?
I'm good. We go to Austin this weekend, and so I was packing, but I feel really good because I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to basically have a conversation that we have often at dinner in our apartment.
Yes, today is Human Rights Day, and this particular weekend is the Human Rights Conference. It's a biannual conference put on by the Human Rights Network, and Dane and I will have the pleasure to travel to represent Trans Women of Color Collective and Casa Ruby on two particular amazing sessions, one around emerging issues in the U.S., and another plenary that Dane will be sitting on, just talking about our transformative work locally and across the globe. So we're really excited about this week. It's been exciting for us, and we're glad that you joined us. Yes. So we're going to start our conversation. Oh, yes. You can tweet us. Me at Hunter Lourdes on Twitter, and Dane.
Me at the Lady Dane.
At the Lady Dane on Twitter. We'll be live tweeting this conversation as well. We're super excited to be here. So we're going to jump right in and talk about why this conversation is important. Why is it for us to talk about trauma, and how does it look when it impacts communities most disproportionately impacted by structural oppression? And what do those tools look like? And how can we really work to shift narratives and paradigms in our lives and in the lives of people around us? So, Dane, tell us a little bit, why is healing conversation, why is it so important to you?
For me, healing and restoration, this idea of resilience is important to me because for so long, well, first I will say this, in a society that tells Black people, particularly Black trans people and gender nonconforming people, that we should not exist, healing is an act of revolution.
It is.
Resilience is an act of revolution. Restoration is an act of revolution. And so for me, it is so important because for so long we have been in a survival mode.
Yeah.
And we've had to do what we've had to do to survive,
Right.
but those things are not long-term and sustainable, even for our own lives, right? And so I'm excited that we're at the point now in which we understand that focusing and zeroing in on healing will actually help to dismantle those systems of oppression that continue to re-traumatize us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I love working with Dane. I'm like, she's my girlfriend, yeah. Not dating girlfriend.
We're sisters.
She's my sister, right? But we have this amazing opportunity to work together. I'm co-founder of Transformative Color Collective. She joined the leadership team about a year ago. And it's like been transformative for us to be able to work together, share space with each other. And it's really been exciting and supportive for me. And even in her new role, here at Casa Ruby, I'm excited to have her also working with us and working with me, in particularly just around creating more opportunities for young people in her role as health and wellness coordinator. And so a lot of what she'll be talking about and we'll be talking about today, Dane will be overseeing bringing that healing and restorative justice and using art as a tool of healing and self-discovery and exploration and celebration for our communities.
Sure.
So I'm really, really super excited to share some of our work with you and also talk about the ways of what it looks like when initiatives and organizations are led by and for the communities that are most disproportionately impacted by structural oppression. That should be off. Yeah, one of the amazing things is being able to have a job and get phone calls when people need you and be able to respond. But right now, my attention is focused on the webinar.
Hey, webinar! All of you.
Webinar! So, yeah. And if you sign up for the webinar, thanks for joining us. We have some objectives. I'm sure that you've read over them. And so without further ado, I just want to move forward to our first video, which really highlights some of the work that we're doing at TWAC. This particular video was selected as one of the 10 finalists for the Social Justice Arcus Prize for global social justice work. And we've also used it to also demonstrate what collective healing looks like, what visual activism looks like, and to chronicle some of our work at Transformative Color Collective. So we want to share this video with you as we begin to jump into our discussion.
In 2013, Alon Nettles, a Black trans woman, was walking with her friends in Harlem when a group of men began to catcall them. One of the men pummeled Alon to her death. She was 21 years old. During this time, our community was broken. It was like we all had been attacked. In that moment, we decided to come together to hold each other, to support each other, and to lift each other up. Alon Nettles was catcalled on an evening in Harlem, across the street from the police station. And during this time, she was with her friends, so she wasn't alone. And when it was found out that she was trans, she was pummeled to her death outside the police station. And no one helped her, and her killer still walks among us today. So today, I want to bring it to the room Alon Nettles, because not one more will we sit back and allow the lives of our trans youth to be taken away. Today we gather because one of our sisters have fallen. Another one of our sisters has been denied her right to move, her right to breathe, her right to thrive unapologetically in her truth. My heart is with those who loved and cherished Goddess Queen Sister, Lila, as who she professed to be. My heart is with every trans person who has been denied their truth by a system that is designed to erase us from the face of this earth. My prayers are with all trans youth who feel that they are alone and that they have no hope for their future. Lila Alcorn was a young trans woman from Ohio, not far from where I grew up in Detroit. She was only 17 years old when she took agency over her life and decided it was not worth living. What message are we sending our young people? Trans Women of Color Collective was born out of a need for our community to engage in collective healing and restoration, to celebrate our lives and our legacy through fellowship, and create revolutionary change that shift paradigms in social justice movements. To carry me sweet, Historically, trans and gender nonconforming people of color have been the catalyst of social justice change. 2014, the LGBT community celebrated the 45th anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion, started by two trans women of color, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. I was that girl too, wanting something better than this, but who do I turn to? In that same year, 12 trans women of color were brutally murdered in a 6-month time span, with no national outrage. Average age of my sisters was less than 35 years old. In the first 2 months of this year, 8 trans women of color were brutally murdered. The average age of my sisters was less than 26 years old. What message are we sending to our young people? That their lives are disposable? That their lives don't matter?
The more that's being done to educate people about trans life or more about the LGBT community, it'll give people a different mindset or a different look at the way that they see things.
We are liberating ourselves today.
If this can happen to one person, this can happen to all. This can happen to all of us.
We need to avoid these crimes by educating our young ones. Thank you and have a blessed day.
We as a community, we need to stick together. So rallies are beneficial. It shows how much people care.
T-Walk is a direct manifestation that all Black trans lives matter. Since coming together in September of 2013, we have traveled the country and the globe, organizing direct actions, marches, protests, holding healing circles and leadership retreats, with the sole purpose of creating opportunities for our communities to come together, to heal from collective trauma, to celebrate our lives, and to build a movement that is reflective of our needs and the vast diversity of us all. In March 2015, we launched our global initiatives that took us to Geneva, Switzerland, where we met with delegates and ambassadors from all over the world to hold America accountable for the cultural, social, and economic human rights violations against our community. The United Nations heard us, and in April 2015, in collaboration with Casa Ruby, we opened our national headquarters in Washington, D.C., 2 blocks from the White House. We are creating the change we seek. And in spite of the obstacles we face, it is clear our communities are resourceful, resilient, and quite capable to lead our movements. In fact, we must lead our movements. It is our destiny. We celebrate our sisterhood, our brotherhood, our kinship, and our kindred. We are all family. T-Walk receives $0 from the government or any major LGBT funding source. Our work is completely funded by private donors who are everyday citizens like you and me, revolutionary freedom fighters. Now is the time to pour a bountiful seed into the works of organizations and initiatives that are led by and for Black trans women creating revolutionary change. Because now more than ever, young Black trans people, our families, our communities, our partners, and our friends desire to heal from collective trauma, restore our collective leadership and legacy, be wrapped in fellowship with folks like us, so that we can move to action to sustain the change that we seek in our lives. Every breath a trans person of color takes is an act of revolution. Every day we wake up in a society designed to destroy us, invalidate us, and tell us that we don't belong. Every day we will also wake up with great purpose to dismantle that shit. Our movement was never about equality. We are building a collective movement centered on healing and liberation. Join us as we all get free. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Oh, and we are back. So yes, we want to talk a little bit about our work and the work we do, but before we can really get into like what are we doing now in our work, we have to definitely put things in context and honor ancestor and honor land. We have a rich history. Trans and gender nonconforming people throughout millennia have shown up in leadership and in spaces and have been erased from those spaces. Dane, as a historian, really has a depth and grasp and understanding of how that has really happened. And I really want you to talk about in context, like in a historical context, like the role of trans and gender non-conforming people in civilizations pre-colonialism. Tell us more about that.
Ashe. So I first I'll give you a little context about like why history was so important to me. I grew up in the Great Blacks and Whites Museum in Baltimore. My aunt was the first curator, and basically like the question that was always, well, the statement that was given to me was, remember who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And remembering who I am was not just about my family, who I was that day, right? but actually who I was within history. And so I took this concept and I said, well, what if I apply it to all of who I am?
Correct.
Not just my identity as a Black person, right? My identity as an Indigenous person, as a daughter of an immigrant, as a daughter of a Muslim father, as a daughter of a Cuban and Indigenous mother. And so for me, it was important to delve deeply. And what I found is that I was delving deeply, I saw myself all throughout history, and that purposefully those identities were erased. And so when we even go back to ancient Africa, there are, I am a priestess of Oya, and that is from the Lukumi. I was initiated into the Cuban branch of it, but it comes from Africa, it comes from Nigeria, from the Yoruba people of West Africa. My dad is from Nigeria, hey. And so Oya she is a sweeping goddess of change. She is a sweeping goddess of the air, of the ancestors, and she's called the bearded woman. And so she's called the bearded woman because of what we would now call in a modern context her gender performance. And so she was often functioning within the capacity of what they would say men functioned in, right? She was a warrior, she was all of these things. But also, within historical context, placing us, living trans and gender non-conforming people of color within the context of a spiritual identity. She also was, they say that many of her priests and priestesses were trans and gender non-conforming people. And that is across the board for all the Orishas. We find ourselves within the culture of Sumar, the goddess Anana. The reason why I called the lead in Yemaya's Daughters Anana Aset. Anana Aset Oya. It's because within the culture of the Sumar, trans and gender non-conforming people were often part of the priesthood of Ananas. And actually, we center in many of her stories as being created by divinity. And there's a story where it talks about us being on the margins, like we are now, and that Anana takes us and she gives us spiritual purpose. We're here in America. Right. This is a place that was colonized by Europeans. We're both indigenous, descendants of indigenous people from here. And so as we look within the culture of our indigenous ancestors within America, we're everywhere. Right. You cannot read a text about a culture unless it's purposefully kept out. Right. without seeing us. And so like there is a what we would now call trans or gender nonconforming, but was a two-spirit shaman of the Sunni people, Wiwa. And she was, the reason why I talk about her so much is because there's actually a famous picture of her at the White House. She was leaving on the White House. And what happened is that we see the thing that happened to her that happens to us so often now, which is that she was, people wrote stories about her, they sexualized her, they fantasized about her. And when I say people, we're talking about colonizers, right? And they had all these fantasies. And then when they found out that she was trans, when they found out she was two-spirit, that she was gender non-conforming, the backlash was awful. And so those are just a few contexts. If we're talking about modern history, right? Harlem.
It's true. It's true. Even in Christian texts, like in the Bible, there's mention of individuals who were not binary,
right?
And so talk a little bit about that.
When we talk about it within the context of the Father God religions, eunuchs feature heavily within these traditions, and so we have to understand, yes, that within a historical context, their idea of gender, their idea of sexuality was framed differently. But this is the thing, right? If I'm trying to see myself in history, I have to understand who I was in history. Right? And then I can define for who I am now. Correct. Within the context of where I'm born. And that's what our ancestors understood, that within each generation, we actually can evolve and define. And so even within Christian texts, eunuchs placed heavily. There was a eunuch in the New Testament who was a messenger and an advisor, a herald for Queen Candice. And we all know who the Kandake was. She was fair. She was everything. In this eunuch, it has this dialogue with this Christian follower within context, but we feature heavily, and particularly in cultures, because what trans and gender nonconforming people could do is that we could bridge the world. Right. And so we had a magical property within these cultures, and because we were not within a strict binary, even when we presented within the binary.
And also understanding that presentation, and many times is an act of survival, act of navigation, right?
Yes. Is that we were still thought of as these magical beings who could do everything. And so the reason why we feature so heavily in Christian texts is because we featured so heavily in pagan texts of the time. And that is, and I'm going to bring Anana back into the story. We actually saved Anana in her story. We went to the underworld and we could go there because we were these all beings, essentially, and save a goddess. And so our ancestors from across the globe revered us. They loved us. They, instead of basically saying, you're this, so we're going to put you in the margins, they said, how can we make a space for you in our culture to be understood, loved, revered, and essential?
Wow. And it's so, it rings true because you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And when you know your history, you're able to be rooted in that foundation, and it empowers you. Even as structural oppression is manifesting every day in our lives, it is our history, it is our culture, it is our ancestry that has rooted us and has rooted our work, our healing work, our restorative justice work. And so I'm really, really excited because when we talk about that, it makes me light up. It makes me feel like I belong to something greater than who I am today. And it also makes me feel like my life's work is connected to this great network, right, of healers, of orators, of people who have just transformed paradigms and transformed civilizations. What's interesting is how that has been erased. That narrative has been erased from the history books. It has been erased even in modern times. And so we really want to talk about that a little bit, but before we can get about that, talk about that erasure, and then also to talk about how we are shifting those paradigms and those narratives. It was important for us to have that historical context. I think that's really, really critical. And so now we want to talk about how, like we talk about a lot of history, and then we talk a lot about theory and practice. But what's also important is demonstrating praxis. Like, what does it really look like when we use art as healing, when we channel our ancestors and our ancestry and use that to really heal the masses, but also heal ourselves. So we want to go to one of Jane's amazing videos to really see some of how that has happened. Because even you ask someone, I can't call you a performer or an artist, like you are a healer. And so you demonstrate that in many different ways. And sometimes that happens on the stage, sometimes that happens more intimately. Okay. And so, and we want people to like to be able to explore the many ways in which they engage in healing, because it's not just some religious context or religious action or even a spiritual one. It can be connected more deeply than just the spiritual connection, but also one that connects us with ancestry, with art, and with culture. Which, I mean, for me, that is spiritual. But for other people, it's okay. So, Oryx, if you could take us to Show to Do from Roaring, and we can experience that.
It's called Show to Do. There's nothing lower than a low down low. There's nothing deeper than the ocean's flow. Hold your head up high, don't you cry. You got a show to do. There's nothing sadder than a lonely girl. She ain't got no love, but rules the world. Make them fall in love, and you're gone. Make a show what you do. I've been watching painted faces, traces of who I wanted to be. Sketches on the air, dream planted, the place of me. There's nothing sadder than the way we were. You were practical, the miracles I prefer. Hold my head up high, my pain is dry. No more shows to do. I've been needing something real. Let my heart back and someone else's dream. Hearing of the shades, time to fight for what is for me, for me. Da, 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 yes, yes, I got my tears, and that's how I'll show when my heart's breathing the silence of my dreams. I don't give a damn. I'm gonna no more shows. I'll move.
Oh, we're back. So yeah, that was an exciting performance from Dane. I want to know what inspired that piece. What were you channeling? What was going on there?
So that piece comes from Roaring the Musical.
Yes,
which is
you
came to see the New York reading of it.
YouTubers out there. All right, so
Sorry.
this is something that I am so bad at.
Or
Singer ever.
okay, great. So that came from I think YouTube was still playing.
Oh, hi, little girl.
And so that comes from Roaring the Musical, and that's written by myself, and Andrew Morrissey did the music, and I did the lyrics in the book and the concept. And I started writing it in 2001. And Roaring the Musical is the first musical written by a Black trans woman. It would be starring a Black trans woman, and about a Black trans woman in the 1920s. Right. And so, as you know, for me, it's a healing piece. Particularly because for so often trans, gender nonconforming, and queer people of color are erased out of the history books, a lot of times on purpose. And so I set it in the Harlem Renaissance because I wanted to remind people that we were there, that we were at the forefront, that we existed, and that the community, our Black community, loved and supported us. Because sometimes we have this narrative like we're not supported by the Black community, where it's like,
our community, our families, we don't like each other.
So I wanted to do away with all those things, as well as, to be honest, if it goes to Broadway, for example, it would hire 4 trans people. It would hire, if I was still a lead, if I was still young enough to play the lead, it would hire myself, it would hire my understudy, because Diamond Malone has to be played by a trans woman. So if I can't go on stage, someone else can do it. It has to be a trans woman. And then there's also a Black trans man character. So he would also have an understudy as well. And so for me, it's healing as it manifests through the art, as it manifests as saying, historically saying that we were there. And so I'm going to place us back at a point that we glorify and we love and we all know, called the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you use, and that's what I have noticed, is like how you transform art, and then how you also use art as healing. Because a lot of your pieces are healing pieces. A lot of them speak to trauma that the community collectively, Black, Indigenous, transgender, nonconforming people of color have experienced. But even like trauma that you've experienced yourself. And so like, for me, a lot of the work I do is a form of healing for me because of the trauma, the erasure, the violence that I have faced. So, like, just tell me, like, let's talk about, like, how that is really manifesting. Like, because I know you have one piece.
I can talk about it.
She wrote another. How many plays have you written?
Well,
the one I saw at the Kennedy Center. So I went to the Kennedy Center and saw this amazing reading. But it was really, really dear to you, and it really transformed how we can use art as a tool of healing. And so could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the piece is called Absalom, and essentially my mother's an evangelist, and a Christian evangelist, and so that piece actually talks about Tamar and her trauma of being raped by her brother. I was molested by my brother at 5 years old, and he never paid for that crime, right? And this is a person who, like, I continually was forced to re-engage with and see and spend time with, and so I wrote Absalom because I had to study the Bible, I had to study history, and I read the story of Tamar, and she kind of, within the historical context, she disappears. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to heal myself. I wanted to be able to also create what I wanted a man in my life to be like, and that's through the character of Absalom. Tamar is me in the play. And so as I wrote the piece, and that piece is about 10 years old, what I was finding was that I was healing myself, because I was essentially saying to myself, to Tamar, to all of our ancestors who had been traumatized, it was not your fault. we will remember you. You will not be forgotten.
Mm.
We will remember you. We will love you. And so during that piece, I have had to continue to re-engage, affirming myself, because it can be painful, right? Like it can be re-traumatizing. But I want to show whole, right? And so that's really what healing means. It means to make whole. And so in order to do that, I had to continue to talk to Tamar, who was me as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Absalom really spoke to me because of, for many reasons, but in particularly because of all of the strong, I don't want to say strong, all of the women who were leads.
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous women, Black women, and also how they came together, right?
Yeah.
And also how, like, when they had a problem, they snatched edges, right? It was like, I love you, sister, but edges dying snatched.
They were snatching edges left and right.
Right? And so, and snatching edges is just like another way of saying, you know, holding people accountable to the space that they occupy in your life, right? We say snatch edges, right? So yeah, so the accountability piece was really, really important to me, but also the sisterhood. Yes, right. The network, the intergenerational display of love and support that was fluid throughout the piece, even when there was conflict.
Yeah.
Right. They still came together as women, as femme-identified individuals, as individuals who were revered as deities. And it was a form of healing for me to also see a play that was written by Black Indigenous trans women that also starred Black Indigenous trans women. Venus Reading, she was amazing. And so to also be able to pour into that was healing for me, because quite often we are told that we're not capable of doing these things. We're not capable of writing plays, directing plays. We're not capable of leading our movement. And we know that that's not true because our ancestors have done it and they've taught it. And from birth, like we was already predestined when we began to defy socially constructive roles of gender and gender performance. It was the indication of the leadership and just the blessing over our lives, right? The purpose and the divinity that had been placed over us. And so for me, Absalom really spoke to that as a healing piece for me, and also as I saw it as a healing piece for you.
Yeah.
It felt like how collective healing manifests.
Ashe, yes.
It was like, so we talk about self-care, right? This whole notion of self-care. And it's like, for me, like, I want to reject that notion or expand the notion of self-care to one of collective care. Mm-hmm. Because people tap into self-care because they're like, oh, I want to engage in self-care because I want to not be burnt out from the work that I'm doing. And so I'm like, let's expand that narrative. How about not engaging in things that burn you out, right?
Right.
And so, like, I'm just going to, like, this whole notion, I'm going to go tap out. I'm tapping out of the work, right, to go engage in self-care so that I can come back and be ran ragged again. That can't be the narrative, right? So, but when we engage in collective care, we're thinking about others. We're thinking about the lives of others. And it's important for us to be able to pour into the lives of others, who especially are the ones around us, because if someone is depleted, how can they support me? Right, and so one of the things that I love about the sisterhood and the relationship that we have is that we're continuously pouring into each other. It's like that
it goes
that
like
thing,
that.
right?
Yeah. Except for the water's never depleted.
It's never depleted. It's never depleted, right? And so, like, I'm really, really excited to even like just share that, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I'm going to go engage in self-care, right? But this whole notion that I'm doing that I can tap out of what I'm doing, and I need to go, like, refresh myself so I can come and run this ragged race again is not one that's not a model that's sustainable. But when we're continuously pouring into each other and supporting each other and centering a model of collective care, we can move towards a place of building towards collective liberation, right?
That's a form of healing too, right? Because, like, access to language. And I feel like sometimes when we talk about access to language, people feel like it's a very bourgeoisie privilege, but it's not. What we mean by access to language is naming your need, articulating your need. And so, I mean, let me tell you something. Last year was very difficult for me. If it had not been for you, for Ruby, even for my mama, right, who, she doesn't have a lot of resources to give me, but she does have love. Right. And so, I want some love. And so, my sister Lovey, it was really empowering for me to, for once in my life, be able to articulate my need and then have people listen and then say, "We here for you, sister."
Right.
And so, yes, like, what is running you down, what's running you ragged. And for me, I think that that's why it's important. Cooperative economics, right? Like that's a form of healing, I believe, because it's engaging that ancestor principle of that pouring into one another and supporting one another. Because then you don't got to work for somebody who don't care about you.
Right. Yeah, and I love how you talk about like articulating and speaking your need, but also even access to language. I mean, because that can happen in many different ways, right? There's something that Malcolm X said: when you learn to speak the language of your oppressor, then that there can be some dialogue and there can be some change. And so I think it's important to have that access to language on so many levels, because then you'll be able to communicate. So it's not this bourgeoisie thing, but it's given that type of connotative feel, right, to also block access.
Right.
And so, and also when you're talking about naming your needs, right, that's also how we in the cycle of trauma. And so what I have learned and come to put into praxis of how I've ended the trauma that was like perpetual, sometimes even self-induced, right, reoccurring trauma, layers and layers of trauma, residual trauma, is actually naming that I have been hurt, right? So naming that trauma, and a lot of times we're ashamed, right? As Black and Indigenous people, we're told that we're strong and we're resilient. But that's really like kind of violent, right? No, I don't want to. Sometimes I am vulnerable and I am fractured and I show up broken. And so to tell me that that's strength is no. That's a lie. That's telling me that I should be experiencing trauma, right? Because now I'm strong because I'm experiencing trauma. No, so we need to break the cycle of trauma by actually naming, nope, actually, I've been hurt, right? And it was you that hurt me. Right. Or it was this thing, right? It was poverty, it was homelessness, it was structural oppression, it was brutality. You know, it was the lack of love and acceptance that hurt, right? And then also naming that because of that hurt, that I may have hurt some other people. I may have caused some hurt, right? Because we say hurt people, but we can't simply end there, right? We have to move forward and then talk about how we're engaging in healing. But make a conscious decision to say, yes, I have been hurt. Yes, I have hurt others, right? But I want to end that cycle. But also celebrating the ways that we are engaging in individual and collective healing. And we do that in many different ways. Like even for our community, people think, okay, you have to have all these access to resources, right? And like even sharing a meal is a form of healing, right? When we sit and even be in spaces with each other, it's an act of revolution, because with the rates of violence and trauma that trans women, Indigenous, gender nonconforming, people of color experience, it's hard to even sit in a room with someone else as dynamic and powerful if you have not really engaged in that work to invest in individual and collective healing. And so this is a form of healing even as we share space today. And so I just want to honor my sister in that space, because, you know, it's important that we have these tools and that we also have people who are working with us on the same page with the same tools, right? Because then we can like empower and build more capacity to heal and help others, right?
What was so ironic in my life is that I started my training at Mamacita Studio under Dr. Sunyata Amin, and it was a community actually of cis women. And where I got my training around healing and herbology and food as medicine and movement and chakras and how we decolonize the body. And so for me, it was so refreshing to see, because we're also told, right, that cis and trans women cannot share space, right? Like they say that we can't exist in the same space and we can't be sisters and we can't be siblings, and but that's not true.
We're not the same.
Right. But like there was this overall reaching idea of oneness and ancestor oneness that we did actually share historically. We were in the temple. We were in the sacred spaces of and oftentimes when the patriarch began to rise, because there was a separation of those genders, we were the ones who were able to go back and forth into those spaces. And so it was just very empowering for me to have these cis elders within the femme community, and pouring into my life and saying, We see you, sister. We love you, sister. You are us.
It's true, and I have similar experiences, and like we have such overlapping experiences, and we always talk about how like this was not our first time meeting, like we have been in previous lifetimes sisters and confidants and comrades, and so like my mom is a pastor, and like I grew up in the church as well, and so like growing up around women who also embraced and loved me and gave me opportunities to really shine and be vibrant and really to like step into me as a person and define what that looks like for me. And so like when we talk about how important it is for family and community, right? And not just biological family, but also chosen family, like being able to surround yourself with people who are really deeply invested, not just in your healing, but in collective healing and collective liberation for all oppressed people. And I think that because we have had those experiences, it has enabled us to rest where we are now, right, in a place where we can understand trauma, identify it, and even be preemptive.
Right.
Right? Because that's where we want to get to be. We want to get to a place where we like, because once we have this understand the cycle of trauma, we can get to a place where we can be preemptive. And so in situations, what people like to call triggers, well, you know, like I got triggered, so now I'm uncontrolled. I can't even function now because you've done something to trigger me, right? And even that word is loaded and full of nuance, right? But how do we get to a place where we can be preemptive, right? And that's also an act of healing and an act of care, where we can recognize,
right,
this is some messy coming.
Seeing clearly, right?
Right? And I'm going to pivot, actually, to avoid that situation. And so, but we can't do that until we've actually acknowledged and named and came up with a plan to say, actually, I'm not going to engage in that, right? Because I want to make sure that I can show up whole every day. And it's totally possible to happen, but we have to be deeply committed in an analysis and praxis that demonstrates that continuously, right?
I tell people, I say, get you some. There was someone was asking me like, what would you tell young trans girls? And I said, get you some friends who are invested in your smile, and then you be that type of friend to them, right? And so what that means to me is that I am deeply invested in my community and my sisters and your smiling. I'm deeply invested in that, and I know with beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're also invested in that for me. And I have stopped as I get older. I have stopped going to places where I know people are not actually in love with me. I stopped going there. I stopped talking to lovers who were not invested in caring about me. I stopped, I stopped being this kind of martyr, because I think that also trauma tells us that we must martyr ourselves for others, and that we cannot be invested in us showing up whole and happy, and you know what I'm saying?
This unconditional existence, right? Like we have to be patient. We hear this a lot with cis allies. People who are on the path to discovery and self-actualization, but who are yet not there at a place where they can be receptive to identities that are celebrated and may not resemble theirs, or how they have seen identities celebrated. And so a lot of times folks say, well, just be patient with us. For instance, when we talk about misgendering and how that's an act of violence. And so, like, holding someone accountable to the space they occupy by saying, actually, my pronouns, or I identify as such, right? And then people will say, well, give us patience, have some patience with us, give us time. I've always seen you as this, and so you have to be patient with me. This is new for me. And so I'm like, that's a bunch of...
That's when I gather my things and I leave.
Because I had read this, because for instance, when strangers on the street come up to me and they come to my dog and it's like, oh, because she's all black, they just assume that it's a boy dog, and it's like, oh, what's his name? And I was like, well, Kashmir doesn't have genders. And they're like, oh, okay. Or even with other people, like you may see a little dog and be like, oh, it's a cute boy, and I was like, oh, it's a girl. No, it's a girl. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's just an immediate switch, and so I'm like, I've seen this, right? And so how do we also like shift that narrative? It's like, no, that's not a form of patience that I need to have.
Right.
Actually, you need to be also deeply invested in the elevation of your own consciousness, right? Misgendering is violence, but holding people accountable to that space and how I identify is a form of healing for me. It's a form of empowerment and strength, and one that we really want to model in spaces, right?
It was used, I mean, misgendering was utilized.
It's the go-to, right? It's the go-to. If you want to get to a trans person, a trans woman, misgender her, and you think you're gonna like interrupt her whole life. But what you really need to understand is that actually, many of us are quite confident in who we are, and we understand that misgendering is a form of violence. And so,
and you can't sympathize without understanding the historical context of that, right? That when the Europeans came and they colonized the Americas, the first thing they did with trans and gender nonconforming two-spirited people within indigenous cultures, nations, I like to call us nations, is that they misgendered those people because they wanted to take their power away, right? Because really that's what trauma is this relationship to power. Right? It's this relationship to, I'm going to traumatize you so that then you have to go through my channels in order to feel healed and whole. And so when we talk about, for example, trans, I can talk about my own experience. What would happen is that I would be traumatized, and then I would acquire a lover, and all he had to do was say, I see you as a woman, you're beautiful, you're all these things, and then I would give him my whole life. This whole treasure trove of goddessness I would give to him even though he wasn't worthy. And so what I was then doing, right, like from the bigger picture, is I was buying into structural oppression and what it says a woman should be, right, which is a sexual tool for a man. And then when we heal, when we get okay with like, child, I know what I look like, I know what I know, and people are like, that's important. I'm like, no, it's not a form of defense, it's a form of healing, of understanding your wholeness and who you are.
It's true. The defense happens when we're impacted by trauma and we don't have tools to navigate that. So we get on the defensive. And what that defense actually looks like is us not addressing the trauma. Like when you like you say, you go to another partner, people call it like coping mechanisms or medicating pain. Actually, and that's what that is, right? And so this is how we medicate the pain, but we never really address the issue. And I have similar instances like with men and with partners and like just experiencing violence in those relationships because like when I lived in Detroit and I was always around my family, they sheltered me in a way and they wrapped me in love. And so when I moved to New York City, away from my family, I thought I needed to have that. I needed someone to tell me that I was loved and that I was valued and that I meant something. And that came in the form of very abusive relationships. But it wasn't until the shift happened when I had to love myself. Right? No one can love me more than I can love myself, and it's until I love myself, then I can really give love and receive love, from anyone else, right? And so that shift happened, and now before you sits a God.
I feel like for me, healing is truly the stripping away. Healing is stripping away of structural oppression. It's the stripping away of what they tell you should identify as and being able to self-identify. Healing is, you said that earlier about like being able to name it. Saying, no, you hurt me.
I'm clear about that. I'm clear that hurt.
That is also a form of stripping away because it does this idea of resilience, right? This idea of resilience has been appropriated, stolen by structural oppression as this form of we can lift
sharecropping.
Yes, we can beat you up, right? And then like, but you're resilient. So,
and that's the gift, right? For share, because like for me with this whole analogy around sharecropping, like you were still a slave,
right?
You were still a slave. It was by another name, right? And so what this resilience is slavery by another name, right? And I know the title of this particular workshop has the word resilience in it, but we are here to like redefine what resilience really means in this context. We are rejecting this notion that to be resilient, that means I have to take and endure trauma and pain and be poor and have nothing. No, that's what structural oppression tells us, that we have to be poor and we have to be impoverished, and that's okay because we're resilient. And in we in another life will be blessed because we endured it. And I'm like, no.
Right, exactly. And wait for a savior, right? And that's a part of it too, right? That's the thing, is that you have to wait for is that you have to wait for a savior to swoop it. Sometimes, a lot of times, that savior has a white face, um, to swoop it, to swoop it and save you. Because if you're just patient enough, that white savior will come
White
and get
Republican
you.
rich. And that's so interesting because we're talking really about the role of colonialism,
Right.
and how it has intently and purposely erased trans and gender nonconforming people, our ancestry, our cultures, our existence, our narratives from hegemonic period, right? From this dominant culture. And so when we talk about this savior narrative, right? And so it's really interesting because now that we're at our halfway point, and it brings us right to our next video, that retro report the New York Times did on transforming history. And it's provocative, it's awe-inspiring. So, Oryx, if we can go to transforming history, as we've reached our halfway point, and then we can move towards how we're talking about shifting from victimhood to personhood, from surviving to thriving, and really delving into the work that we're doing at Casa Ruby and all across the globe to really empower our communities and pour into their lives. So.
Caitlyn Jenner, the woman formerly known as Bruce Jenner, made her debut in a big way.
We're achieving greater and greater visibility in society.
Transgender visibility might be moving from the margins into the mainstream. But what does it mean?
As long as trans women of color are suffering and dying in the streets, I'm going to hold off a little bit on the celebrations.
The 8th trans woman murdered in the U.S. this year.
Every breath a trans person takes is an act of revolution.
And while transgender people helped kick off the fight for gay equality, progress in their fight for civil rights has been decades in the making.
What's shocking is not Bruce Jenner coming out. What's shocking is the way people treat us.
That female side is part of me.
When Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, told a story about being born with a body that didn't match her internal sense of who she is, many people gained a better understanding of what it means to be a transgender person.
Finally, people have woken up and realized that they know someone who's transgender.
With an award-winning TV show about a family patriarch changing gender,
This is me.
and transgender actress Laverne Cox gracing the cover of Time magazine, you might think society has reached a new level of understanding. Activist Lords Ashley Hunter says you would be mistaken.
The community that I work for is wondering how they're going to eat tonight, wondering if they're going to have health coverage, wondering if they're even going to make it back to the shelter where they're staying. I don't want people to watch Transparent and say this is the lives of trans people, because it is not.
In 2002, Hunter came to New York City at age 26 on a one-way bus ticket from Detroit with $20 in her pocket. She planned on doing community service work in exchange for a place to stay, but when she went to a women's shelter, she was turned away for being transgender. Then, she says, things only got worse.
So I found myself homeless and ended up having to be assigned to a men's shelter called Ward's Island. Ward's Island housed about 1,000 men. And every night there was a fear for me. I couldn't sleep. I can remember a time where I went to take a shower and a man came into a shower and raped me. And he had a razor blade. And there was nothing that I can do. When I went to the shelter staff to tell them what had happened to me, they blamed me. They told me that I didn't have to be there, that it was my choice to live this lifestyle that I was living. And so, for me, having to have those experiences, it's just a snapshot of what we have to go through just to live. Most trans people would rather sleep under an overpass or in the park than have to deal with that type of violence.
Hunter runs the Trans Women of Color Collective to provide leadership and raise awareness, not only about current events, but historical ones as well.
We come from a rich legacy.
What up, all you YouTubers?
We're experiencing some technical difficulty, so just bear with us as we recue the video. Thank you so much.
My computer crashed.
Oh.
Never happened before. Sorry. I'm gonna have to reload the webinar.
Oh my. So we're gonna have to reload the system.
No, I think there's nobody else on at this point. I think that kicked everybody out when it crashed.
Okay. It was getting good.
So good.
I missed that whole section of a terrible experience at the men's shelter, Lords, but it was powerful, and I get the gist of it. And while we're queuing the next video, Dane and Lords, do you want to tell us what happens in the video that we're not able to see, or do you want to move forward into the next section?
Okay,
I don't think we're live.
I think we might be live.
Are we live?
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Oh yeah, we
Are we live?
It's okay. It's totally okay. We're doing great.
People are
We're having technical difficulties with the feed, with the video, but Oryx is I think going to be queuing up the next video, and Lords and Dane, just please continue where you were.
We could try to pick up that video where we left off if you want. Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it back because it was kind of skipping through.
All right, but I'm gonna have to bring up. Let's see. Bear with us here.
Yes.
Please. Oh wait. Did you email me that video? I'm sorry.
It was on. Yes, I emailed the video.
Okay. We apologize for the technical difficulties here. My computer crashed on us, and so we are looking for that last video that crashed.
Well, in the interim, Lords and Dane, I've got a question for you from the audience. Somebody asked a question, and I'll just tell you, I'll read it to you. It came in at 2:57 today. It says, I would love advice on working with teens or young adults on being good allies to the people of color trans community. Can you comment on that? Yeah, I think you're muted. Hold on. Unmute. I think I'll be muted. There we go. Okay, perfect. Let me repeat the question, you guys. Ladies, I'm sorry. I'd love advice on working with teens or young adults on being good allies to the people of color trans community. Can you comment on that?
Okay. Yes, thank you so much for the question. I want to provide access to some language, and then I want give Dane to follow up on the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so like in the work that we do, we want to move from words like allyship or allies, words like equality, words like diversity, because they mimic assimilation, right? And so ally also others oppression, others in quotes, OTHERS. And what I mean by that is an ally gets to tap out, right, of structural oppression. They show up, they do their ally dance, and then they tap out and go back to their existence. So we're really not interested in building community with people who think that they can really tap out of the violence that is impacting all of us. Like it impacts us differently and on different levels, right? So we're moving away from the oppression Olympics and actually understanding that structural oppression manifests in every aspect of all our lives, regardless if we benefit from it or if we're impacted from it. So words that we really like to glean towards is comrade, collaborator, even co-conspirator, right? Because that shows that you understand how our lives are inextricably linked. And it also demonstrates that you don't tap out. You're not tapping out of oppression. It may impact you differently, but you're leveraging your access to resources to create opportunities for others. And that's what comrades and co-conspirators do. And that's what people who work collaboratively do. And so how can they do that?
How can they do that? It's several ways. I think that you first have to ask, what are my resources? What can I leverage? And then how can I show up in a space and be able to create a pathway, right? Because ultimately what it is that trans and gender nonconforming people of color have already been leading. We've already given you the model. For example, at Casa Ruby and at TWOC, we've already shown the model. So people can literally take that model and go, bloop, 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 bloop. If you are very wealthy, having a living wage, having a trans person with praxis and analysis come and work in your organization for a living wage. And when I say a living wage, I mean she could pay her rent, they could pay their rent, they could eat, they could buy some clothes, right? And it's not like we're just scraping by.
Right.
And so I think that there are several ways, but first you have to ask, what resources do I have? Because if we are co-conspirators, that means that there's also a resource that I have, and we leverage those things together.
Right. Dana's giving you like the 3.5. Because it's true, right? Because before you could talk about your resources and your access and leveraging, I need for you to go do some healing work. I need for you to invest in naming the trauma that you have experienced and also naming the trauma that you have engaged in. Right. Silence is a form of violence, right? So you can say, well, I never denied a trans woman a job. I never misgendered a trans person. I never killed a trans person. But you may have been silent when you heard someone making a joke, right? And it doesn't cost anything to stand up and stand out for someone, right, and speak up against violence. So I think also naming how structural oppression manifests, right? Because if you come to me, I'm going to be like, whose name do you speak, right? And so in understanding and working together, we have to say we are both deeply impacted by this. And understanding these are the ways that I am impacted as a non-trans person, and I understand the ways it impacts your life as a trans person. And I'm deeply invested in shifting that narrative. And then we could be like, okay. And so how, in what ways are you deeply invested? Yeah. And so then questions about leveraging access to resources, and also asking, what does support look like? Mm-hmm. Right? Because some people may not, it may look differently. Yeah. Right? Some people may need access to resources. Some people just may need you to cook a meal. Solidarity is another word that has been used and has been appropriated, right? Mm-hmm. I'm in solidarity with you. But really, what does that really look like? And so that's like having intentional conversations, even with friends and colleagues, even with the people that I work with. I ask them all the time, like, what does support look like from me for you, mm-hmm. right? How I'm invested in your success. And I want to know, I don't have to tell you what I have, especially if you already know what access I have. Mm-hmm. And if you tell me what access looks like for you, right, we can begin to work together to liberate all of us, right? It's not just the trans people that are impacted by structural oppression. We're just disproportionately impacted, right? And in a way that is really an epidemic, and it's really like impacting our socioeconomic growth and development, as well as our legacies, right? And so it's so many levels, but the first level is actually engaging in that trauma work, engaging in the elevation, right, of your own consciousness, right? And sometimes leverage looks like you educating other cis people, right? So I hope that helps answer. That was a thorough response.
That was great. That was
You
great
want to
response.
try
I
to?
really appreciate it.
You want to try to continue the video? Because I found the link to the video again. If you want to finish it.
This video, and then we can get back to questions because I really like the engagement as well.
Okay, let's give the video one more shot here.
Okay.
All right.
It's a hard time. For the first time, the clientele sort of fought back.
The protests lasted for days, and transgender people were among the hundreds who took part.
Transgender people were the most motivated to fight back because they had been abused the worst by the system. But also, the second thing is they had nothing to lose. For them, it was a great opportunity to get up on the soapbox and really give it to society. What have you been doing to us? You're so wrong.
One of the early icons in the fight for transgender rights was the late Sylvia Rivera.
Sylvia always thought of Stonewall as the beginning of her activism to make changes in the world.
I was grateful to be there to see the revolution being born.
She really was the mother of the transgender movement.
Sylvia was a Puerto Rican street drag queen who, along with her friend Marsha P. Johnson, created Star House, a refuge for transgender runaways.
These kids, they were going to end up being just ground up by the system, not being able to find jobs, being forced into prostitution. Sylvia and Marsha hadn't lived it, so they knew what they were doing.
The survival instincts that made Rivera a fierce advocate were at odds, she said, with a gay rights movement that was trying to establish a more conventional identity.
We do not fit into their role of Main Street gay men and women.
Rivera stormed the stage after being excluded from a 1973 gay rights rally in New York City's Washington Square Park. She demanded that transgender people be recognized as part of the burgeoning lesbian and gay rights movement.
You all tell me to go and hide my tail between my legs. I will not longer put up with this shit.
She was considered kind of disruptive and a loud mouth.
I believe in us getting our rights, or else I would not be out there fighting for our rights.
Sylvia Rivera died in 2002. That same year, New York State passed a gay rights bill that, despite Sylvia's dying wishes, did not include protections for trans people.
Even on her deathbed, she fought for the rights of her people.
Across the country, in California, 3 years before Stonewall, a similar uprising had taken place. It had mostly been forgotten, until historian Susan Stryker stumbled on an obscure San Francisco gay magazine.
I found this beautiful document, and I open it up, and the centerfold is this thing that says, on a hot August night in 1966, gays rose up.
At Gene Compton's cafeteria, a 24-hour diner popular with transgender women, another routine police sweep erupted in spontaneous violence. Stryker made a film about the uprising.
A police car was destroyed, the corner newsstand was set on fire, and years of pent-up resentment boiled out into the night. It was the first collective militant action against police harassment that we know of in U.S. history by trans and queer people. The cops thought they were dealing with people who were like the lowest rung of society.
Decades of those kinds of attitudes have taken their toll on the estimated 700,000 transgender people in the U.S. About half are believed to be trans men, says Nick Adams, who works for GLAAD, an LGBT advocacy organization. There isn't a lot of statistical information about the community, but it's a diverse group. Adam says the focus now should be on those most in need.
Visibility really needs to translate into legislative changes that make the world a safer place for those transgender people who are really struggling.
When you don't have resources, it makes you more susceptible to physical violence because now you're disposable. No one cares about you.
Whatever people think is shocking about transgender people's lives is nothing compared to the injustice that we have to face every freaking day.
Professor Jennifer Finney Boylan teaches in the English department at Barnard College and has written a best-selling memoir.
To be trans means to be visible. If you walk out your door, it can mean you are at risk for violence.
Many transgender people have been the targets of violent hate crimes. They're also at greater risk for suicide, as was the case of an Ohio transgender teen.
Alcorn's suicide note ended with a plea. My death needs to mean something. Fix society, please.
What's shocking is that young people like Leila Alcorn have to throw themselves in front of a truck rather than live their lives.
Transgender teens and adults say they routinely endure discrimination in employment, housing, access to public bathrooms, and government willingness to acknowledge their gender status in official documents.
People fire us for being who we are.
The trans community has been left out of legislative advances by the gay community. Our gay and lesbian counterparts moved on and are celebrating life in ways that we have yet to experience. The priority is not marriage, not for Black trans women.
And while momentum now may be on the upswing, the movement that began nearly half a century ago still has a lot of obstacles to overcome.
Sylvia will be pissed the hell off that we're still fighting and struggling and we're still dying.
We'll know that our work is done when everyone can live the life that they love with honor and dignity.
Wonderful. So that was a great piece done by New York Times Retro Report around some of the work that we're doing. Also,
I have several announcements.
Sorry about this.
Every hospital, every nurse is notified. Every woman in this country
Technical
must be aware that
difficulties
it's
here.
most important
I'm trying to
that
get back
they
to
check their
the
medicine cabinet, that they do not take this drug.
There we go.
In the early 1960s.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
My computer is going nuts. I can't get back to stuff very easily for some reason.
No drug struck more fear into the hearts of pregnant women.
One of the most horrifying episodes in...
All right.
All right. We didn't lose the webinar that time. All right.
Good, great.
All right.
Thank you so much, people, for being
Marcia,
patient.
you're doing your best.
Yes.
Lors and Dane, hi. Hey, do you want to shift towards the dialogue on shifting the narrative, or continue where you were leaving off on talking about the allies and the others? And
there's lots of comments, affirmations, questions, and things. So
I'm really interested in getting to that. I think we've given.
Yeah.
I would like to take questions.
All right. Excellent. Here's one. Question number 2. Often I see that Black men stray away from supporting concerns specific to women of color. How have you seen their support in this current objective?
What was the question?
It says, I know, often I see that Black men stray away from supporting concerns specific to women of color. How have you seen their support in this current objective?
Well, I don't necessarily agree that Black men have strayed away from supporting trans women of color.
Yeah, I disagree with that, because I think that I will be honest. I think that sometimes when we have this conversation, right, recently there was a lot of talk about Black men come out and say you love trans women and all these things, right? But in reality, that's a little bit transphobic to me. And I'll tell you why. Who they're actually naming is they're naming cis Black men, right?
Right. That's why I was like, I don't believe that Black, because I got a whole bunch of listen, baby.
And so
support mother.
And I'm just like, but who, right? Like who are you actually talking about? Like what cis Black men are you actually talking about?
Right.
And oftentimes, okay, I'm gonna do a little slang here. They're talking about the trade. The trade ain't trying to support nobody.
The mythical trade.
The mythical trade ain't trying to support anybody. And so if we're talking about structural oppression, right, and this idea of we're all being impacted, we already know what the answer is, right? If someone is not being in solidarity, particularly with a trans or gender nonconforming person of color, it is because they have brought into structural oppression. That's the answer.
Right.
But I will say this. I have a slew of Black trans men and gender nonconforming siblings who are so supportive of me. So, I have seen the support.
Yeah, I have to. And we also have to understand the conditions in which Black men exist, right? They are also impacted by structural oppression. And how that shows up for them is that they're even told not to support us. Right. So we also have to honor and recognize that. I'm not trying to say that they're not accountable also to the space that they occupy, but also we have to put things in context, especially when we're talking about violence, structural oppression, and even what does support look like.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Are you ready for the next question?
Yes.
Okay. Question number 3. It's a long one. Do you interrogate context and let me start over, I'm sorry. Do you interrogate context and intent if someone misgenders a member of the community or using quote unquote ballroom language? Specifically, I'm talking about some of the narratives that have come out of shows like RuPaul's Drag Race. How do we get people to understand the nuances between expression and entertainment?
I don't. I believe that there.
You go here first.
There are many experiences, and I think that everyone has a right to exist in a space where they feel celebrated. Even drag queens. I feel like people need to do work to invest in just awareness. And existence and what that looks like for people that looks differently from them. Mm-hmm. The narratives coming out of RuPaul's Drag Race did not start the violence against Black trans women or trans women of color. It may perpetuate or reinforce, but it is not the root cause. And so I think when we actually identify the root cause, as opposed to focusing on symptoms, then we really can address some change and some shifting. So that's my short answer.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we also need to understand where you can go for your context. I do not, if I want to know about trans women of color, I'm not going to go to RuPaul's Drag Race. I'm just not, and that's also because, I had a trans auntie who had to moonlight as a drag queen. I come from a whole place in Baltimore where trans women and drag queens work together hand in hand to dismantle structural oppression. So, where are you going for your information? RuPaul's Drag Race is not it.
I had an aunt. My aunt was trans, and she died back in the 80s before she really got to tell me how beautiful I am, and before I really got to experience, what her presence in my family before me, how that would impact my life and my family's response and care and love for me. And back then, she was considered a drag queen, but you could never tell her she wasn't a woman. And so I think understanding that context, and also in terms of interrogation, I'm not really interested in interrogating anyone's existence. That's really not where I want to put my energy.
No, I mean, I think that's real. What the question said, right, is not actually what I think the meaning is, and I'm not trying to put words into people's mouths, but oftentimes there's this question of celebrity, right, and what role does celebrities have in educating us and educating the people, right? And I think that as we talk about history, as we talk about healing from trauma, as we talk about art as advocacy, we love Nina Simone. People like Abby Lincoln.
I am Nina Simone.
I feel like you should have played her in the movie, though.
But
playing her now. That's a whole other story. But like we come from a legacy of artist advocates who understood their positionality, their visibility, and leveraged that. So, yeah, share that.
Excellent. Excellent answer. Thanks a lot. You know, when I look at you, you're the fact that you're both healers and shamans and you know that you speak to your ancestors. I mean, I think it's great. Okay, here's the next question. Are you ready?
No, we want affirmation.
Oh, I love affirmations. So I'll step in here and
Excellent. Let me jump off. Rex, jump on.
I'll read some of these affirmations. Okay, there's a lot of them, by the way. So.
Oh, see, yes.
Oryx, come on screen.
Okay, I'll come on. Here, I'll come on.
Oryx is shy. I know.
All right. Hi, everybody. Okay.
There you are.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so there was one that said the song was beautiful, and that was referring to Dane's song.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
There's one that says, I honor you both. Thank you so much for speaking to this topic. We need to hear more on this topic. It is so important because so many of us are getting burnt out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
There's one that says, I am in love with you both. Did you hear that one?
What did they say?
I am in love with you both.
Oh! As you should.
Stand in line, right?
There's another one that says yes with a smiley face.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, here's another question that I should copy. I'll copy for you. Let's see. The topic is interesting and the speakers are excellent in their delivery, and I've learned something new today. I have to say bye. Thanks for sharing. I look forward to the recording so I can catch up on what I missed. Thank you. Big thank you. Let's see, what else? Co-conspirators, yes. Thank you. And you two lovely ladies have given so much amazing and valuable information today. Thank you so much for all this information. I took tons of notes and plan to add in so much of this to my work and personal life. Thank you for sharing your time, history, and resources. So much love, light, and positivity to you too.
Oh, thank you.
Ashe.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for bringing your joy of being you, for your commitment to wholeness on your own terms. I love what you said about trauma healing and acknowledging your hurt. It has done such terrible harm, yet you convey your healing through affirmative action and community love and acceptance. It was very good to know how in history trans women were so revered. In this, it is my hope that history repeat itself. I am a person with very deep feelings. I can only begin to imagine the struggles, the fears, the pain trans non-conforming people are faced with today. I hope with all my heart that modern societies can learn compassion, practice acceptance, more than acceptance, to be simply with each other as who we choose to be. All right. Oh, I'm loving this webinar. Thank you. I've been tweeting some of the insights. I would tell my friends about this. I may do a blog post about comradeship.
Thank you. Comrades. Yeah. I have a question for the two of you. It's what does the term cis, spelled CIS, mean? This is the first time I've heard it.
Google. I would say Google. I would say Google, particularly. Yes.
It doesn't mean Google. The task.
No, the task
is to Google. The spelling is CIS.
Yeah.
And that is a form of healing for you to actively engage in the elevation of your own consciousness.
Ashe. And then also when you Google, what happens is, right, as I read, and not like, well, Lord and Dane said, right? Like it becomes empowering.
I found out for myself what cis meant, right? Yes, that's power. Because it's access to language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nice, okay. This is another question. It's quite long, having to do with foster parents and trans youth. It's the person says, I'm working to become a foster parent within the next 5 years and will be prioritizing my home for transgender youth. With the understanding that youth of color are disproportionately entered into the foster care system, what can I do to be a good parent to a trans youth of color as someone who is white and trans, while working towards abolishing the disproportionality of the system?
I think, I often ask when I'm dealing with like parents, right? I say, what did you want when you were a child? You wanted someone to listen. You wanted someone to be affirming. You wanted someone to love you. You wanted someone to care. I know that from dealing with both youth and adults, is that oftentimes what anyone really wants is to be affirmed. And so I say, be affirming, be loving, be the type of parent that you wanted when you were younger. And if your parent, it has nothing to do with like how your parents treated you, because if your parents were amazing, then that's the parent everybody wants. So be that parent. That's how I feel. Just from a form of parenting, and what I would say to people who even aren't trans, if they were taking care of trans children.
Yeah, children are children. And they need love and support, encouragement, direction, guidance. Children need that. Far so often trans kids don't get that. And so there's nothing special. Just, being a parent is being a parent. It doesn't matter if your child is trans or not. It doesn't matter if you are the same ethnic background or not. I think what is really important, if you are thinking about adopting a child or fostering a child, and you are not from the same culture or genetics, that you become educated or aligned with folk who can provide that type of ancestry and culture for your child, because it's important that they know their history. It's important that, there's one thing that I can remember growing up is my parents, told me things about my history that really, really I was able to hold on to, especially in those tough times when they weren't around. So, Ashe.
Interesting. Okay. Here's another question. There are several terms I hear under the trans umbrella, such as third gender, gender non-binary, agender, gender non-binary, etc. I would like your thoughts on this. Do you think all of these terms stem from our human instincts to label? Are these labels beneficial or are they detrimental? Referring to the terms under the trans umbrella. And I don't know that it's necessarily just trans umbrella. I think it might fall under the LGBTQ vocabulary regarding gender. The person's asking, what do you think is the meaning of third gender, gender non-binary, agender, gender non-binary, etc.? And do you think these labels are beneficial or are they detrimental?
And you might want to close your webcam, Jen. Theirs is freezing. Yeah. Okay. Now we have.
Are we?
Yeah. I was saying now.
When we look at our indigenous ancestors had all these titles. It meant something different in their language, but we have always existed. Bigender, non-gender, non-binary. All of these gender expressions and truths have existed. And so I have no issue with all of them. I love them all. I'm like, you identify who you want to be. Who are you?
Because at the end of the day, we are all human. And so as long as we all Well, then some people may not identify
as human.
That wasn't the question. Right. So, since that was not the question, we are all human. And so we all deserve the right to identify however we choose. And we all deserve the right to live in a world free from violence, full of love and support and affirmation. And that's what's key. And like Dane said, these identities have existed before, maybe by a different name. But we also have to understand in context, as Dane explained earlier, that for millennia, colonists have erased history. It happened. We can go the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Africans, all the indigenous populations. Their histories have been almost drastically erased and wiped out due to colonial imperialism. And so yes, all of these labels are necessary. Yes, all of these labels are helpful, because if someone can find their identity and find affirmation in that, why would you stand in the way of that? Lost your mind. All right.
So we have a couple more affirmations that came in. I think the point of resilience as slavery is extremely important. Thank you for your insights. A big thank you. And so many more folks have to hear your words. Comment your intellectual generosity around intersectionality is uplifting. Ashe.
Ashe.
And do we have any more questions?
No, not on my end. No.
So that's
video. Where would you folks like to go?
Well, given the hour and the content, and we both have flights to catch, and we've had a delightful experience. We would like to go to our closing video, which is Not One More. And of course, Not One More is a compilation written and sang by Sydney Chase, brilliant trans woman, writer, performer, artist, healer, and Celine Butler, graphic designer, brilliant mind, inspirational person, who are deeply invested in the work that we do at TWAP. Not One More is a video that was created to honor and lift up those who have been lost to violence. Trans women of color this year, at least 28 trans women of color have been brutally murdered in the United States, and over 143 nationwide. I can't even think, globally rather, I can't even think of the amount of numbers of violence that has happened. And not also just physical violence, but structural violence as well, right? And so this song, Not One More, raises that awareness, raises that visibility. And it's also a way of how we heal through visual activism. And so we would like to bring our portion of the webinar to a close with the Not One More video. And we encourage people to go to our website, twocc.us, casaruby.org, learn more about our work, take an opportunity to click the volunteer button, take the opportunity to click the donate button, and pour a bountiful seed into the works that are led by and for trans, indigenous, gender nonconforming people of color.
And grab my books, because my books are really, really centered around uplifting trans narratives, particularly trans narratives of color, both trans men, trans women, and I'm branching into literary transgender nonconforming characters.
What's the website?
So my website is www.ladydanefe.com, which I'm super, super excited about, because TWAC and Casa Ruby have both been instrumental in helping me get my work out there. So
right, so you have 3 levels of engagement. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a delightful experience.
Thank you, sis. Thank you for sharing space with me.
Such a delightful experience for us.
Yeah, and thank you both. Thank you, Jen. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Assuming that this video works and there's no more crashing, I really encourage people to stay online to watch this video. It's beautiful. So we're going to give it a shot here. Thank you for attending today.
Marilyn Monroe, and what the news won't show. She was killed in broad daylight. Accountability is uncomfortable, but we still gotta take it sometimes. Responsibility for what we benefit from. Got a choice to make, and we still gotta make it sometime. Not another one, not another one, not one more, sister. Not another one, not another one, not one more, sister. Say a name that's really proud, scream it out loud. Being born black shouldn't be a crime. I'm a talk about Candace Capri, and how it could have been me. If she was a white girl, she could still be alive. Accountability is uncomfortable, but we still gotta take it sometimes. Responsibility for what we benefit from. Got a choice to make, and we still gotta make it sometime. Not another one, not another one, not one more, sister. Not another one, not another one, not one more, sister. India Clark, I say your name. Casey Haggard, I say your name. London Chanel, I say your name. Jade Trulette, I say your name. Brigolek, I say your name. Yasmin Payne, I say your name. Lamia Beard, I say your name. I say your name, I say your name. Goddess Edwards, I say your name. Christina Grant, I say your name. Mercedes Williamson, say your name. Zion Woods, say your name. Say your name, say your name, say your name, say your name. I say your name. Will you say your name?